History remembers Rome as marble, law, engineering, discipline. It remembers senators in white togas, triumphal arches, public baths, and the machinery of empire. It does not like to remember what happened after the wedding feast. It does not like to remember the part that took place behind closed doors under lamplight in a house the bride had never entered, in front of people she had not chosen, under customs so invasive that later generations tried very hard to pretend they had never existed at all. Roman marriage was not a romance. It was a transfer, a legal handover of status, fertility, and future heirs from one household to another. And like every major transfer in Rome, it was not considered complete until it had been verified. This is what marriage looks like when a civilization treats a woman's body like evidence. It is the year 89 CE, and an 18-year-old bride named Livia Tersa is standing beneath a saffron-colored veil in a room full of strangers. Her husband is waiting. So is an elderly ceremonial attendant. So are slaves holding basins and cloths. So is a silent physician. In the corner, covered by a heavy drape, stands a wooden object no one has bothered to explain to her. Her mother cried while arranging her hair that morning, not loudly, not enough to ruin the braids. Just enough for Livia to notice that something was wrong. When she leaned closer, her mother gave her one instruction. Do not resist. Whatever they ask of you, do not resist. It only makes everything harder. By the end of the night, Livia will understand exactly what she meant. The day had started beautifully. That is how these things work. Roman rituals knew how to disguise power with spectacle. Her hair had been parted with a spearhead and woven into the 6 ceremonial braids expected of a proper bride. Wool ribbons held everything in place. Over her head hung the bright bridal veil, the flammeum, the color of fire, making her instantly legible to the city as a woman in transition. At the temple, the sacrifice went well. The omens were favorable. The formulas were spoken. Her father completed the words that shifted her from his authority toward that of her husband. She repeated the traditional vow that announced, in its own ancient way, that where he was master, she would be wife. It sounded poetic enough to the crowd. It sounded less poetic if you paid attention to what Rome thought marriage was actually for. Because Rome did not marry for love. Not primarily. Rome married for lineage, alliance, property, legitimacy, inheritance. Marriage joined households. Marriage organized power. Marriage produced citizens. A wealthy man did not take a wife merely to share his life. He took a wife to secure his line. And that meant one thing mattered beyond almost everything else. Certainty. Certainty that the bride came untouched. Certainty that the marriage had been physically completed. Certainty that any child born from the union could not later be challenged in court by relatives with property on the line. Rome had built its greatness on categorizing, recording, witnessing, and formalizing. It did not stop that habit at the bedroom door. Livia's husband, Marcus Petronius Rufus, is about 25 years older than she is. He is wealthy, established, useful, and, to Livia, nearly a stranger. She has met him only a handful of times before today. That does not matter. The contract is arranged. The alliance is acceptable. The wedding procession moves through the streets by torchlight while the crowd throws walnuts as symbols of fertility and shouts the traditional obscene verses that Romans liked to pretend were merely festive. The songs are explicit, deliberately humiliating. Officially, they are there to ward off evil and amuse the gods. In practice, they announce to the city that the bride's body is no longer private. It is entering public ritual. Her face burns beneath the veil. Around her, everyone behaves as if this is normal. That is one of the darkest things about old systems. The people trapped inside them often do not need to be convinced they are cruel. They only need to be told they are ancient. By the time the procession reaches Marcus's house, daylight is gone. The doorway is decorated with greenery and wool. Torches mark the entrance. The crowd presses close enough to smell. Tradition says the groom must lift the bride over the threshold so she does not stumble and bring bad fortune into the home. Tradition also says many things more politely than it means them. The old gesture echoes an older memory, that brides were once taken, not invited. Marcus lifts her and carries her inside. The door shuts. The crowd's laughter becomes a muffled blur outside, and Livia sees the room clearly for the first time. There are too many people. An elderly woman in ceremonial dress stands waiting. The pronuba, the matron assigned to supervise the rites. Nearby is a priest of uncertain function. 3 female slaves hold cloths and bowls of scented water. There is an older man with a leather case containing medical instruments, and in the corner, still hidden under a draped covering, stands that wooden shape, almost 4 feet tall, impossible not to notice and impossible to understand. The pronuba takes Livia's hands with a grip firmer than comfort requires and welcomes her to her husband's house. Then she says, the sacred rites must now be completed. Few civilizations were better than Rome at turning violence into procedure. Roman law had long imagined the household as a structure of command. At its oldest and harshest, a woman passing into marriage could move fully into the hand, the manus of her husband, transferring from one man's legal power to another's. By the imperial era, the system had changed in practice, softened around the edges, diversified in form. Women of means could own property under some arrangements. Families had options. But the underlying logic remained intact. Marriage was not just emotion sanctified by ritual, it was status formalized by witnesses. It was a woman's reproductive future placed inside a legal framework built by men who distrusted uncertainty. And where uncertainty threatened inheritance, Rome invented ceremony to crush it. Think about how Romans handled land. Boundaries were marked, neighbors could be called, survey lines mattered, contracts were sealed. Think about how they handled citizenship, office, taxation, military rank, everything documented, everything witnessed, everything made legible to authority. Now apply that same bureaucratic instinct to the first night of marriage, and the result is exactly as disturbing as you think it is. A union was not fully complete because a feast had occurred. It was not complete because vows had been spoken. It was not complete because a father had consented. It became undeniable only when the body confirmed what the ceremony had promised. The pronuba guides Livia toward the draped figure in the corner. Her heart is pounding hard enough to make her dizzy. She has never heard anyone explain this part. Women do not speak of it in detail. Men do not write of it plainly. Later, Christian authors will describe it with disgust. Earlier pagan ones will mention it obliquely, with wording that suggests even they knew some rites were better left half-hidden. But the silence in that room tells Livia what the songs in the street never could. Everyone here knows what comes next. Everyone except her. The pronuba tells her she must greet Mutinus Tutinus. The name means nothing to Livia. It means little to most modern ears. But in the Roman world, fertility and obscenity often lived side by side. Rome was full of phallic symbols in miniature, hung around children's necks, painted in gardens, set up as charms against envy and bad luck. Those are the survivable pieces of Roman vulgarity, the ones museums can display with a smile. This is not that. This is not a joke charm. This is not a trinket. This is a ritual object meant for a bride on the edge of consummation, presented under divine language and social force so that what follows can be called sacred instead of what it more obviously is. Livia reaches for the cloth. When it falls away, she sees a wooden idol carved with unmistakable anatomical purpose, deliberate, proportioned, impossible to misunderstand. The room goes still around her. The pronuba begins to explain what the old writers rarely would. Before the husband may approach, the bride must submit herself to the emblem of the fertility god. Later, authors, especially Christian ones, will treat the practice as a scandal from a polluted age. Augustine writes with visible fury about Roman brides being made to sit upon the god's emblem before lying with their husbands. Arnobius implies something even more invasive. Lactantius refuses detail altogether, as if description itself would stain him. Modern readers have spent centuries trying to soften the implications, to interpret the rite as symbolic, brief, almost theatrical. The surviving language does not help them much. What exactly every household did, in what regions, under what variations, is something historians still debate. What is not debated is that the ritual had a reputation, even in antiquity, for being indecent. The official explanation was fertility. It usually is. Fertility, blessing, initiation, protection, preparation. Old systems are full of beautiful words placed over ugly mechanisms. The less official explanation is easier to see. Submission had to be demonstrated, resistance had to be broken, virginity had to be transformed from a family's claim into a husband's certainty. And if all of that could be framed as custom older than memory, then no one in the room had to admit what they were participating in. Technically, Livia could refuse. Technically, many people trapped in legal systems can refuse right up until the consequences are made clear. If she refuses, the union may collapse. She returns to her father's house not as a protected daughter, but as a failed bride. A girl who would not complete what Roman society expected, completed. Her marriage prospects sour. Her family absorbs the humiliation. The whispered blame settles on her, not the system. The songs in the street become prophecy. So she does not refuse. Most women in history do not endure the worst things because they agree with them. They endure them because every exit has been deliberately made more ruinous than obedience. When the rite is over, the slaves step forward with warmed, scented water. They wash her. Prayers are spoken. The cleansing looks devotional. It is also practical. The physician finally moves. This is where Rome becomes unmistakably Roman. In marriages involving wealth, status, or inheritance, the bride's body could become a site of medical and legal interest. The logic was simple and merciless. If virginity before marriage and consummation after marriage could someday matter in disputes over legitimacy, then testimony mattered. Observation mattered, documentation mattered. The physician's presence is not there to help Livia. He is there to certify transition. Earlier examination established one condition. The later examination confirms another. And if a challenge ever emerges in the future, witnesses can be summoned, statements given, details repeated before a magistrate. Imagine building a civilization so proud of its legal genius that it turns a wedding night into an evidentiary procedure. Modern people often like to separate ancient brutality from ancient sophistication, as if law and cruelty occupy opposite ends of a moral scale. Rome should cure them of that illusion. Rome was sophisticated enough to build aqueducts, roads, tax systems, military hierarchies, and legal categories that shaped continents. Rome was also sophisticated enough to apply that same administrative intelligence to humiliation. Refinement and dehumanization are not opposites. Very often they are partners. The examination is conducted, the witnesses remain. No one in the room appears shocked. That may be the most chilling part. Nothing about this strikes them as extraordinary. The bride's comfort does not enter the equation because her comfort is not what is being transferred. Her body is the route through which lineage moves. Her emotional life is noise in a system designed to hear only proof. When that phase is over, the pronuba leads Livia toward the bedchamber. The room is prepared exactly as custom requires. Lamps burn steadily. The bed is positioned with ritual intention. The doorway remains open. That matters. Privacy is not the point. Observation is. The pronuba remains nearby to supervise. Slaves wait within call. The scene is not arranged for intimacy. It is arranged for confirmation. Even Marcus, when he enters, does not look triumphant. He looks uneasy, as if he understands, at least dimly, that the role he is about to play is less husband than final witness to a transfer already underway. The pronuba announces that the bride has been made ready, that the gods have seen, that the union must now be completed according to ancestral law. Her voice is formal, practiced, detached. What follows unfolds under rule more than desire. There are customs to be observed, positions to be corrected, stages to be recognized. The door stays open. The lamps keep burning. Sound travels into the corridor. The household does not need to see everything to know enough. In another age, on another night, two strangers entering a room together after a wedding might still contain the possibility of tenderness. Here, tenderness is beside the point. The bed has become parchment. The bride's body has become the place where a contract is written in a language no one will later claim not to understand. By dawn, the physician returns. He has one task left. Confirm consummation. Note the signs Rome expects to find. The pronuba gives her testimony. Witnesses acknowledge what has occurred. The marriage is now complete in the most Roman sense possible, not because the couple believes it, not because affection exists, but because procedure has been satisfied. Livia Tirsa, 18 years old, is now officially a wife. And then life continues, which is another thing history does not tell you often enough. The most horrifying systems do not always end with spectacle. Sometimes they dissolve back into daily routine so quickly that the victim barely has time to understand that a threshold has been crossed. Livia will go on. She will manage a household. She will host. She will bear children. She will perform the duties of a respectable Roman matron. From the outside, she may appear composed, even dignified. She may become very good at it. People living under old orders usually do. What she will probably never do is describe the wedding night in detail, not to friends, not to daughters, not to anyone likely to preserve her voice. Roman women of her status were not writing memoirs about what it felt like to be processed through marriage as property. That silence has confused later historians. It should not. The absence of first-hand detail is not proof that nothing terrible happened. More often, it is proof that the thing was too familiar to explain. People do not document the water they are forced to swim in every day. The evidence survives instead in fragments: hostile Christian denunciations, casual legal remarks, references in medical writing, ritual leftovers, uncomfortable lines from authors who seem determined to speak without quite saying. When those fragments are placed side by side, the shape becomes visible, not perfectly. History is never perfect, but clearly enough. For centuries, Roman marriage had two faces. The public face was spectacle. Saffron veils, wedding songs, walnuts, torches, laughter, processions, decorated thresholds. That is the face later ages like to remember because it flatters the image of Rome as ceremonially refined. The hidden face was supervision, verification, bodily scrutiny, divine obscenity, and the legal absorption of a woman into a structure built to guarantee male certainty. That is the face people started trying to forget. They did not forget by accident. The old rites begin to fade, not because Rome suddenly develops a conscience, but because the civilization around them changes. Christianity spreads. New theological assumptions arrive. Marriage becomes increasingly framed as sacrament rather than household transfer. Modesty takes on new force. The idea that women possess souls equal in dignity to men, however imperfectly applied in practice, makes some older customs harder to defend openly. Rituals once tolerated as ancestral begin to look filthy, pagan, unbearable. The attendants remain, but their roles shrink. The pronuba becomes ceremonial rather than supervisory. The fertility objects disappear. References to mutunus tutunus are buried, mocked, or left to rot in obscure texts. Paintings are plastered over. Objects are smashed or discarded. Libraries preserve less than they might have. Scholars, centuries later, inherit a Rome already edited by people who wanted posterity to meet the empire in marble, not in lamplight. And the edit worked. Most people today imagine Roman weddings as charmingly theatrical. A little strange, perhaps. A little primitive, but mostly picturesque. They picture the veil, the procession, the old vows, the household gods. They do not picture an 18-year-old bride in a room with witnesses and a physician, while a civilization that adored procedure turns her fear into custom. They do not picture a wooden idol hidden under linen waiting to be uncovered, as if the worst thing in the room must first be given the dignity of suspense. They do not picture a mother trying to keep her hands steady while dressing her daughter for what she cannot prevent. Rome hoped the world would remember the torches and forget the verification. It almost succeeded. That is the useful lie empires tell about themselves. They preserve the architecture and let the victims disappear. They keep the roads, the legal maxims, the military discipline, the poetry, the spectacle. They let the women who absorbed the human cost fall silent. But the fragments survive. fragments always survive. A furious line from Augustine, an embarrassed reference from Varro, a passing detail in a medical text, a ceremony described too cautiously to be innocent. Piece by piece, the erased room comes back into view. And when it does, it changes the way Rome looks. It is no longer enough to say that Rome gave the West law. The question becomes what that law believed a woman was. It is no longer enough to admire Roman order. The question becomes whom that order was built to protect and whom it was built to expose. It is no longer enough to praise the empire's sophistication. The question becomes how often sophistication is simply cruelty, organized with confidence. Livia died without leaving us her own version. Most women like her did. That is why the story matters. Not because she was uniquely unfortunate, but because she was not. Because there were generations of brides before her and generations after, led through decorated doorways into rituals they did not design, did not name, and could not safely refuse. Because the most terrifying customs in history are rarely the ones everyone admits are monstrous. They are the ones so normalized that no one bothers to defend them. They only call them tradition. The horrifying wedding night. Rome tried to erase from history was not horrifying because it was chaotic. It was horrifying because it was structured. It had attendants. It had language. It had divine approval. It had legal logic. It had witnesses. It had procedures. It had a civilization behind it. And that is always worse. Random cruelty shocks the conscience. Systematic cruelty rewrites it. Rome built roads that still shape maps. It built laws that still shape arguments. It built myths that still shape imagination. And somewhere beneath all of that marble memory is a room lit by oil lamps, where a young woman is learning, too late, that the wedding feast was not the event. The event is this: the locked expectation, the watching silence, the ritual dressed as ancestry, the body turned into proof. History remembers empires for what they build in stone. It should spend more time remembering what they built into people.